Okay, I am facing some problem. I think I'll have to do it without the PPT. Is it fine? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are audible. Your video is clear too.
Okay. So, a very good morning to everyone present here today, and also a very big thank you to all the organizers of this event. And I'm truly and very deeply honored to be a part of this deliberation today. Thank you, Dr. Nityananda Kalita, for being there and for highlighting the main points of the topic we are discussing today. And thank you, Sekhar sir and Dimpy Das ma'am as well for highlighting the important aspects of women empowerment and what the situation we are going through now in this COVID-19 period. And I had titled my talk for today as COVID-19, its impact on women's education and empowerment. So earlier, Rituparna has already highlighted many of the vital insights regarding the impact of this pandemic on women, what as women we go through in the society and how different sections of women are facing, this pandemic, the crisis differently, and how it is only what was there, it's a reflection of the social structures which were present earlier. Now, as we are going through such a difficult phase in our life with the COVID-19 crisis, along with various other natural disasters, like, for instance, the flash flood, which is creating a havoc for many people, mostly in Assam and Bihar, and situations in other realms have not been promising either, and which has further worsened the situation in these trying times. So atrocities have increased, and there has been an economic recession due to which millions of people are facing consequences all over the world. Consequences seem to be grimmer when we talk about the underprivileged and marginalized section of the society on whom the majority of the burden of the society lies. And here in this talk, as I have already mentioned and we have already been discussing, we'll talk about the impact it has on women and the way in which it challenges the status and position in the society. So before I go on to discuss about the pandemic on women, I feel since I'll be talking about it from an economic perspective, I feel we need to go back and put a little light to the status of women way before this crisis has appeared. Because I feel it will provide us vital links to analyze the situation we are facing in the present times. So the inequalities, oppression the women face in society today, we can say that it stems from a very theoretical or conceptual nature. And it was more often based on how women's role, their status, or the works they do are defined by the society. Now, going by a Marxist perspective, it can be argued that the social oppression of women has a material base. And the social as well as cultural norms are extensions or reinforcers of the division of labor based on gender. Like Rituparna has already highlighted how this division of labor we can see it in every phase of our life, in our livelihood, in the work, education, everywhere, and how these features explain how a social system, for instance, let's say capitalism, operates. So now if we go back to understanding of the simple society, the very simple societies, we can say that the gender division of labor was still present there, but the scholars and anthropologists, basically like Emmanuel Terre, there's Mia So and others who pointed out to the sphere of work they do. The activities like hunting and which require the men to go out were considered of a masculine domain, and women were mostly involved in the domestic work. But here, one of the most important points that should be noted is that the boundaries of these spheres of work done by men and women were very much fluid. There were also numerous activities men and women did together, like some includes fishing, slash and burn, agriculture. This can be taken as a few examples. So we can say that there was no particular valuation of this task, as it was perceived that women made equal contributions for the survival of the the family or the community or the economy. So when exactly or how we can say that a stark distinction between men and women appeared? If you go back again, the answer lies in the development of property, in which the division of labor it underwent considerable changes. Feminists all over the world, they mostly argue how women become a property in these societies. Since the societies I'm talking about right now and tribal societies, exogamous marriages were practiced. Exogamous marriages in the marriage outside their tribe. And in these marriages, women were being used, they were exchanged for beads, hunting equipments, etc., which were considered very valuable in the society. So ultimately, the social control over females was necessary for a system to function and reproduce and thus gain strength. So in this process, what happened, women were restricted to the role of reproduction and homemaking to a large extent in the societies. And men were held to be the breadwinners, as they enjoyed the supremacy over women, both in the public as well as private spheres, that is both in the family as well in the society. And if I contrasting this scenario, the contribution of women to family and community has largely gone unnoticed. Like we have seen in societies today also, women make so much contribution to the society, but more than half of their work goes unnoticed. A feminist, Simone de Beauvoir, she rightly puts it as one is not born a woman, rather one becomes one. So right from the birth and throughout the formative years, the society, it forces women into a place, a status and a role. And therefore, it becomes difficult for her to deviate from the pattern which is associated to her on the basis of these values. And she acts in a way based on the unnoticed background experiences. These unnoticed background experiences are taken to be granted. And this is how it gets ingrained in the mindset of people. So even though these are not done deliberately at times, the differences which form gets more pronounced at times. In this aspect, I want to bring into view the works of ethno-methodologists like Garfinkel, who claims that this way in which reality gets objective or becomes a social fact are actually the achievement of local processes. And by local processes, I mean the action of societal members, the way women are treated in the society, the way women act according to the norms and behaviors which are considered to be acceptable in the society. So in India, in our society as well, we can see how individuals act according to these standards which are both culturally and socially defined. Now, when I'm saying this, today, we can see that there are instances where men and women are both sharing the household duties. As Rituparna has mentioned, that men helps the woman, and society feels that when men do the housework, they are helping the woman. And how is it viewed? How is this prospect viewed in the society? For instance, people might say that, oh, look at this girl. She's so lucky to have a husband who is helping her so much in the housework, taking care of the child. It is a really good family. But why? Firstly, we have to question, why is such a view there? And relating to this, a very similar aspect was when I was taking a class, and I asked my students, how many of you in this classroom feel that a man should help his wife in doing the household chores? So almost abruptly, each and every single student of my class, both boys and girls, raised their hands and said that, yeah, it's very necessary for a man to help a woman in her housework. And then the second question I asked them was, but why should a man help? Isn't the man a part of the house itself? Isn't he a part of the family? Isn't he doing those chores for himself as well? So when I was talking about this unnoticed background experiences, these can be some of the instances which are taken for granted in our society. And this is how our society is structured. Housework or domestic work for men are just considered to be an add-on to the productive work which is does on the economy. And for women, it's just the opposite. For women, housework is taken as a duty. While most of the women may be doing productive work outside the house, uh, but it does not kind of diminish the role in their household work, because culturally only women are supposed to do such kind of work in an Indian society. And here I would also like to give instances of some advertisement, actually many advertisements which we see in the television. Like there are advertisements showing appliances, or dishwash bars or detergents, which makes women's job easier. So there was this advertisement where a woman, her hobby was to become a baker. She loves baking, but it was shown that she does not get time for all these things because she has to do a lot of housework. She has to take care of the children and lot many responsibilities. So what happens? Her husband, he comes into the aid and he gives her this dishwashing bar which cleans the plate in one instant. So then it was shown that how she could, how she could manage both the housework and saving much of her time for the work she can do in the productive sphere, in the economic and productive realm. And so these are many instances, and even though there have been various problems, so many of this has been highlighted by Rituparna, so I'll not go into details. So there are many problems and legislations, political influences over time. We have seen that it mostly kind of helps Indian women only notionally. In reality, the situation is very different. A majority of Indian women are still illiterate, powerless, and unemployed, and they're mostly in the informal sector. Like 81% of women still work in the informal economy. And most importantly, all the sections of women are somehow dictated largely by the patriarchal values. And these same patterns, the same social structures, it seems to get in motion in terms of work, education, employment, and also labor. And the list goes on like that. There is a sociologist, Pere Bourdieu. In his work, he calls he talks about doxa, D-O-X-A. And doxa means how the structure, the social structure of the society impinges upon an individual, and the actor kind of do the task or do what they have to do according to the structure which is there. So even though they have their agency to do something, they almost do everything which is done according to the structure, and this kind of creates a habitus on how one behaves. So this is what our society is facing. Everyone is behaving on how the societal norms and cultures expects us to work or work in the society. Now this second part of my presentation is more focused on the COVID-19 period, the stay home, stay safe period. And when I discuss about this unprecedented situation we are all in right now, and the crisis we are facing in day-to-day life in the spheres of livelihood, education, employment, and if it affects lives of women much more than men, and though we have seen that biologically it affects men more, socially and culturally it is the woman who is facing the majority of burden of this pandemic. And when we see what are the effects happening in the society, we can again go back and see that it's a similar kind of, it's a mirrored reflection kind of thing which is going on in the structures of the society on how it operates. So again, the all pertinent questions come in front of us in a different leaf, if we can say, and we can see how different sections of society are reacting to this situation. And since the pandemic situations like this are very unprecedented, none of us know how to act and how to get out of this situation of chaos and uncertainty. However, as they say that even if each one of us in the world are facing the same storm, the boats we are in are very, very different. Now, if I talk about my case or many of us in this webinar today, or my friends, even though we are facing a huge burden of this crisis, we are trying to adjust to it. Many of us are trying to be creative. We are learning to cook, investing times in other hobbies like learning a new instrument, making YouTube contents, investing time on our research work. While there is also a majority out there who are just trying to survive in this world. In cases like this, as I have already mentioned, it is the marginalized section of the society who suffer the most, who bear the brunt of this pandemic. And we have seen the plight of the migrant workers. We have seen the domestic violence on women, on how it's increasing. And the lockdown itself has reported more than 50% rise in domestic violence all over India. Why is this happening? It's because the sense of isolation, financial and medical anxiety, along with the sinking economy, this all adds up to the crisis and challenges the concept of escape. The concept of escape for the victims. And the abusers, the family members who do this to the women, they're just using the COVID-19 crisis as an excuse for violence that they do on their women. And the environments like work, schools, which were the places of escape, like I have mentioned, does not exist now in this sphere. And the toxic behavior which women go through in their homes because they're locked down in their homes, it has no vaccine. Even if there might be a vaccine for corona someday, but the domestic violence and atrocities the women go through, which is reinforced by the patriarchal fear in our society, it keeps women from speaking up just the way they were before. And then when going to the sphere of education, we can see how it has affected the entire education scenario of our country. So in elementary and mid-school, more than 250 million children have been affected by this crisis, according to a report prepared by UNICEF. And even though the steps have been taken by government, NCERT, they have taken alternative measures like radio podcast, online educations. There are organizations like the Diksha, then open education sources. We have seen how many of them can actually get access to these services. In a country when there is such a huge rural-urban divide, along with the gender divide, it can only be imagined as to how far these measures are feasible. Like in my master's and during my master's days, I was doing a field work in Tejpur and the villages of Bhalukjarni and Ahotjarni to see the sanitation conditions of the village. So when I was doing the studies, I could see how the sanitation facilities was, and also that there are no schools around. Okay, there is only one school which is very far away from the place, and most girls cannot access to these schools. And to top it all, there is no sanitation facilities, like there was no bathrooms present. So even before the pandemic, this situation was going on where girls could not get the education they wanted. And now when we are facing the pandemic, we can only know how much it will further, destroy the situation. And another instance to top it all, in a local newspaper, I think 1 month back, I saw a small sketch of a daughter she was belonging from a rural background, and she was pleading her father to get her a smartphone because she's lagging far behind in her courses. She was not at par with the other students of her class. So along with the rural-urban divide, then the gender divide, there is also the digital divide, which acts in to further the crisis. So Digital divide adds as to one of the major crises in times like today. So the personal computers, Wi-Fi, internet, everything which we can access are only mostly it's mostly an urban upper class and upper middle class or middle class phenomena. Even though there is excess of cafes, most of them are used by men, and women do not get access to them. And in villages, in rural areas, like I have mentioned the examples of Bhalukjarni and Ahodguri, there are no internet cafes as well, which are in nearby those places. So we can only see how the situations, how there are different situations that the people have to go through. And it's not that this is the first pandemic, as it was already highlighted in the speech before, that the situation kind of pandemic has occurred in history, earlier history as well. So we have seen how the Ebola virus, it showed that quarantines can significantly reduce women's economic and livelihood activities. It increases the poverty rates and food insecurity. So hunger also becomes one major problem in these trying times. In education, as I have already mentioned before, girls mostly face this burden because even before the pandemic, we can see how family is skeptical of educating their daughters. And I have often heard of instances about members from non-profit organizations like Teach for India. The members, they share the stories about the hardships they have to go through to persuade the family members to let their girls study. And from their stories, we can know the sad situation of our society. And now during this pandemic, we don't know what will be the future of these girl students, because with financial crisis and age-old societal norms, most families will decide to marry off their daughters rather than continuing with their education once the pandemic is over. So another news in June, it was published in June, there was a news where a schoolgirl from Kerala committed suicide due to financial crisis in her family, making her unable to continue with her studies. So cases of suicides are also increasing in one sphere, if you can see. And now, as I have talked about the elementary education, mid-school education, if we go to the higher education, the situation seems to be more dreary due to various reasons. And India's higher education, I feel, is far from being prepared to deal and materialize the educational technologies in the COVID crisis. The measures which are taken are available. Yes, they're available, but only to a minority who resides in cities and towns, where mostly in cities and towns, whereas the socially disadvantaged majority are at a huge loss. And the shutting down of university hostels also have been major problem for the students, because students, mostly the girl students, they do not want to go to the home, because at least in the universities they have an environment where they can study. But when they go to home, they know how their situations will be, how they will be, they will go through all those society pressures that we're going through. Now they can say that there is a pandemic happening, your future has become uncertain, and we never know what will happen in your future, so it's better to get married. So these are the crises going on. And again, in terms of employment also, the women have faced a major blow. In our country, women form a massive part of informal economy, as I've already mentioned. And the percentage of women in informal economy is also higher than that of men. And also because of lack of education, they settle for jobs which are low paid and without social security. In this pandemic, most of such jobs are affected for many, and for many it is also the sole income of supporting their family. Like we can see the people in Beltola weekly market, we can see the people who came to sell their products in this market weekly, they are not able to come. And in my dissertation in MA, I did a study on the economic conditions of these women, and they seem to say that they were only the sole members of their family, as the husbands were busy drinking or they do not do any work. So we can, it's to think about what they're going through. It's very, it's very scary and also very devastating. And Same is going on with the conditions of beauty parlor workers who works in salons. They have to, ask for help from others now, since their work is completely gone. It's not there now. So all these issues, when we see, uh, most of the issues which we're facing now in the pandemic was still going on in the earlier structures of the society, as I have already mentioned. And this pandemic is just an eye-opener to how we can act in a reflexive manner, because it is quite evident that the old normal will keep on repeating itself, like the terms we use, old normal and new normal, but the old normal will keep on repeating itself in different ways in the new normal, if as well, if the situation, if the core issues are not solved. And the new normal which we are seeing today have only pointed out to the fault lines present in the society. So what we can do in this trying times, what can we do in a pandemic, how can we reduce the gender gap, is something all of us wants to know. It won't be easy. It won't be easy because it's already structured in the society, in how a society works. But even then, there are proper steps and policy measures which can be taken, and the policy measures which are already there can be rectified. For instance, the whole range of economic policies for both immediate response and the long-term recovery need to be designed, as Rituparna has mentioned, from a gendered lens. Because let's be very honest here that even after the pandemic, the long-term recovery which is there, it will take a toll on everyone, especially the women. So policies need to be revisited. And because of earlier pandemics, we have seen how difficult it is for individuals, especially women, to get back on their feet after a pandemic. Measures to improve such crises includes removal of barriers that prevent their full involvement of women in economic activities. There should be equal pay, equal opportunities, since it leads to women empowerment, which we are talking about today. And most important thing is that mechanisms to promote women's self-employment and small businesses needs to be taken into account, because it is how in our society most of the women, they work in small businesses or they're self-employed. And more, rather than seeing a equal treatment, I feel an approach which is based on equity should be kept in mind, because we can see how women in different sections of the society have different needs, and according to their needs, if the government or the policies can fulfill their little demands so that they can get their functional needs, it will be a huge relief. And such economic responses would include both the public as well as in the private spheres. Further, which is the most important thing, narrowing gender-based education gaps, narrowing gaps in digital divide is very necessary, because if there is digital divide, which is vehement in the societies today, the concept of online education will not be fruitful, will never be fruitful, if there is such a high gap between the rural and urban areas in getting the internet accessibility. Also, lastly, the formal labor market, increasing the participation of women in this labor market can improve the role of women in uplifting their status in the society. Because if it's not done, if their works which they do are not possible now, they will further be pushed back into where they were in the earlier times, like the violence they were facing. Without work, they will go into a society where again this gender related violence will become more. So main thing is thus to alter the way our entire social structure is working. This is what can actually solve the problem of gender crisis that is going on in the society. With this, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for giving us an in-depth view right from history historical perspective to present the scenario through some lively examples of our nearby locations of such as Beltala and Beltala Weekly Market and all. Thank you, ma'am. The next part of today's agenda will be a feedback from Principal Sir. Principal Sir, if you are on the line.
Yes, Sekhar, I have been here. Sekhar, yes, I have been here.
Thank you.